At 30, Noah Bennett had $83 left to his name. His business was gone. His marriage was over. The bank had taken everything else. With 50 of his last dollars, he bought an old barn that had belonged to his late Uncle Henry. People at the auction laughed. They said the roof was collapsing, the walls were rotting, and the only thing worth saving was the scrap wood. But 3 weeks after moving in, while replacing a broken roof beam, Noah noticed something strange. The dust above him wasn't falling. It was collecting around the outline of a wooden hatch that shouldn't have existed. When he finally pried it open, he discovered a hidden attic no one in town had ever mentioned. What he found there wasn't money. It wasn't gold. It was something that explained why his uncle had spent 30 years protecting a worthless old barn that everyone else wanted torn down. This is how it all began. Noah Bennett had once believed that working harder than everyone else was enough. At 30, he knew better. The locksmith shop he had spent 7 years building closed on a gray Tuesday morning after the bank finalized the foreclosure. The landlord had already changed the locks by the time Noah returned with the last box of tools he was allowed to keep. It felt like a cruel joke. A locksmith locked out of his own business. By the end of the week, the truck was gone, repossessed before sunrise. His apartment followed 2 weeks later. The divorce papers had been signed months before that. His ex-wife hadn't left because they stopped loving each other. She had left because every conversation had become another promise Noah couldn't keep. Standing outside a convenience store with a backpack holding everything he owned, Noah counted the money in his wallet for the 3rd time that day. $83, 4 20s, 3 $1 bills. That was all that remained after 10 years of chasing a future that had quietly disappeared beneath his feet. He drove his borrowed bicycle across town to the county auction because the newspaper had promised free coffee and a chance to buy used tools. Noah wasn't planning to purchase anything. He simply wanted to look. The auction yard was crowded with farmers, mechanics, collectors, and curious neighbors. Rusted tractors stood beside broken furniture. Old machinery waited beneath faded tarps. Noah walked slowly, hands buried in his jacket pockets, trying not to imagine owning any of it. Then the auctioneer announced the final property of the morning. "Old Bennett Barn," he shouted, "belonged to the late Henry Bennett. Structure only. Land lease transfers with purchase." Several people glanced toward a weathered photograph clipped to the auction board. The barn leaned slightly to one side. Half the roof looked ready to collapse. One wall had faded almost silver after decades beneath the sun. Someone near the front chuckled. "Should charge folks $50 to haul it away." Another man laughed. "That place isn't worth the nails holding it together." Noah stared at the photograph. Uncle Henry. They hadn't spoken in nearly 12 years, not because they argued. Life had simply drifted apart after Noah moved away to build his business. Henry had never married, never had children. He lived quietly outside town, repairing whatever people brought him, though Noah had never understood how the old man survived. The auctioneer raised his hand. "Opening bid, $50. Silence answered him. "50. Still nothing. Noah looked down at the bills in his wallet. $50 meant losing more than half of everything he had left. It was irresponsible, foolish, exactly the kind of decision that had gotten him into trouble before. Yet something about seeing his family name beside the words "Old Barn" made it impossible to walk away. Before he could stop himself, Noah lifted one hand. 50. Heads turned. The auctioneer smiled immediately. $50. Do I hear 60? Nobody answered. The crowd seemed almost amused. An older farmer shook his head. "Kids buying firewood," another voice called out. Hope the roof falls after you get your money's worth. A few people laughed. The auctioneer waited another moment before bringing the gavel down. Sold! $50. Noah counted out 5 $20 bills, received $33 in change, and accepted a rusted iron key attached to a faded leather tag that read, H. Bennett Barn. The key felt surprisingly heavy in his palm. By late afternoon, he followed a narrow gravel road beyond the edge of town until the barn appeared between rows of overgrown maple trees. Time had been unkind to it. Weeds reached almost to the windows. One sliding door leaned crooked on its track. Ivy climbed the outer walls as though trying to pull the building back into the earth. Noah unlocked the chain around the entrance and pushed the heavy door aside. Dust drifted through narrow beams of sunlight. Inside stood old workbenches, shelves of carefully labeled jars, hand tools hanging neatly on wooden pegs, and stacks of lumber protected beneath canvas sheets. Nothing looked abandoned. It looked paused, as if Uncle Henry had planned to return after lunch. Noah walked slowly across the worn wooden floor, running his fingers over a scarred workbench polished smooth by years of use. Every hammer rested in its place. Every plane blade had been cleaned. Every measuring tape had been rolled tight. Someone had cared deeply about this barn until the very end. As evening settled outside, Noah stepped back into the center of the building and looked toward the roof. High above the rafters, where only darkness should have been, he noticed a faint line cutting across the old beams. It was perfectly straight, too straight to be part of the roof. Then he saw something else. Fresh scrape marks crossed one of the support beams, as though a ladder had been placed there again and again. Noah searched the floor below. There was no ladder anywhere in the barn. Noah spent his first night inside the barn wrapped in an old canvas tarp he found folded neatly on a shelf. Rain tapped against the tin roof for hours, but not a single drop landed inside. Whoever had cared for this place had kept it standing far longer than anyone in town seemed willing to admit. At sunrise, Noah walked outside with a cup of instant coffee made over a small camping stove. In daylight, the barn looked even older. The paint had almost disappeared. Ivy clung to the rear wall, and several roof boards had warped with age. Yet something felt wrong about calling it abandoned. The grass around the entrance had been cut months earlier, not years. The hinges on the large sliding door moved without much resistance. Even the lock he had opened yesterday had been freshly oiled some time before Uncle Henry died. Noah spent the morning cleaning. He swept years of dust from the floor, opened every window to let fresh air inside, and carried broken crates into a pile behind the barn. The more he worked, the stranger the building became. Every tool had its own place. Every drawer contained labeled nails, screws, hinges, and bolts sorted by size. Glass jars held carefully organized hardware. Shelves were numbered in faded handwriting. Uncle Henry hadn't simply stored things here. He had built a system. Around noon, an old pickup rolled slowly into the yard. A gray-haired woman stepped out carrying a basket covered with a towel. "You must be Noah," she said with a warm smile. "I'm Grace Miller. I lived next door to your uncle for 43 years. Noah thanked her as she handed him fresh biscuits and homemade soup. "I didn't expect visitors." "Henry never let anyone nearby go hungry," Grace replied. "Seems wrong to let his nephew start any differently." They sat outside beneath the shade of a maple tree while Noah ate. Grace's eyes wandered toward the barn several times. He loved this place more than most people love their own homes. Noah looked toward the weathered roof. Everyone at the auction acted like it was falling apart. Grace chuckled softly. "They've been saying that for 20 years. Then why didn't it collapse? Because every autumn, Henry climbed onto that roof and replaced whatever needed replacing. Noah frowned. By himself until the very end. She smiled at the memory. Stubborn man wouldn't let anyone help. Noah thought about the straight scrape marks high across the rafters. What was he always fixing? Grace hesitated. He'd never say, just that the roof had to stay strong. For what? She looked away. He believed some things deserved protecting. After lunch, Grace helped Noah sort old lumber stacked along one wall. Behind a pile of cedar boards, Noah discovered a framed photograph wrapped carefully in cloth. He wiped away the dust. Uncle Henry stood smiling in front of the barn, surrounded by nearly a dozen children of different ages. Some held bicycles, others carried wooden toys. Everyone looked happy. Who are they? Noah asked. Grace studied the picture for a long moment. Children from around town. Family. No. Then why are they here? Grace smiled sadly. Because Henry never turned anyone away. Before Noah could ask another question, he noticed something else in the photograph. Leaning against the wall behind Uncle Henry was a long wooden ladder. He immediately looked around the barn. Every wall, every corner. Nothing. Where's the ladder? Grace blinked. What ladder? Noah pointed to the photograph. This one. She leaned closer. I'd forgotten about that. It's gone. Grace slowly folded the cloth back around the frame. Yes. Do you know where it went? She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked toward the rafters high above them. Henry always kept that ladder locked away after he finished using it. Noah followed her gaze. Why? Grace stood and brushed dust from her hands. Because he never wanted anyone climbing up there. Noah looked back toward the ceiling. The scrape marks suddenly made more sense. Someone had been using a ladder repeatedly, but without one now, reaching the upper beams would be nearly impossible. As Grace carried the empty soup bowls toward her truck, she stopped beside the driver's door. Your uncle only had one rule about this barn. Noah waited. She smiled faintly, though there was concern behind her eyes. He never let anyone go upstairs. She climbed into the truck before Noah could ask the obvious question. Upstairs, Noah slowly turned back toward the barn. From outside, the roofline looked ordinary. There were no visible windows, no second floor, no staircase. Yet the straight scrape marks across the rafters remained exactly where he had seen them the night before, ending beneath the darkest corner of the roof, where there shouldn't have been enough space for anything at all. The words upstairs stayed with Noah through the night. Every time the old barn creaked beneath the wind, he found himself staring into the darkness above the rafters, wondering how a second level could exist inside a building that looked too small to hold one. At first light, he climbed onto a workbench and studied the heavy beams more carefully. The scrape marks were real. Years of wood had been polished smooth, where something had repeatedly rubbed against them. A ladder. Grace had remembered the ladder in the photograph, but it had disappeared along with any obvious way to reach whatever lay above. Noah spent the morning continuing to clean. If there was another level, there had to be some clue hidden among the tools Uncle Henry had arranged so carefully. Every shelf seemed almost obsessively organized. Nails were sorted by length. Paintbrushes hung in perfect order. Chisels rested inside a handmade rack, each one sharpened and lightly oiled. Henry had treated even the simplest screwdriver with respect. Behind an old cabinet filled with hinges, Noah discovered another workbench pushed against the back wall beneath a dusty window. Unlike the others, this one was covered with finished projects instead of tools. A child's wooden rocking horse stood beside a bright red toy wagon. There was a birdhouse painted blue, a carefully repaired violin case, and 3 bicycles that looked almost new despite their age. Each item carried a small paper tag tied with string. Noah picked up the first one. Repaired, Spring, 2016. The second tag simply read, "Ready for Emma," the third said. "Return after harvest." He frowned. None of the names meant anything to him. More surprising was the condition of the repairs. Every object looked ready to be returned to its owner, yet they had never left the barn. A pickup truck pulled into the yard just before noon. Caleb Ross climbed out carrying a toolbox over one shoulder. He was taller than Noah had expected, with rough hands and sawdust caught in his beard. "Grace said you might need another pair of hands," he said. Noah smiled. "Depends if you work for $33. Caleb laughed. "Keep your money. Henry fixed half the town's furniture over the years without charging much. Figure I still owe him." Together they replaced several loose boards along the barn's side wall. While Caleb worked, Noah showed him the repaired toys and bicycles. "Any idea why they're still here?" Caleb looked over the tags. "Some families probably moved away. Some may have forgotten." He picked up the violin case. Henry never threw anything out if he thought someone might come back for it. Noah looked around the crowded workbench. "Looks like he spent years waiting." Caleb nodded quietly. "That sounds like him." As they cleared more space near the rear wall, Noah noticed a narrow drawer built beneath the workbench. It stuck badly, but finally slid open after several pulls. Inside lay dozens of unopened envelopes stacked neatly in bundles. Every envelope carried a different handwriting across the front. "Thank you, Henry. God bless you. We never forgot your kindness." Some included Christmas cards. Others contained family photographs. None had ever been opened. Noah carefully untied one bundle. The first letter described how Henry had repaired a widow's dining table after a flood without accepting payment. Another thanked him for rebuilding a wheelchair ramp before winter. A child had drawn a picture of the barn with bright yellow crayons and written, "Thank you for fixing my bike." Noah smiled despite the ache in his chest. He never even opened these. Caleb looked around the quiet barn. Maybe he didn't need to. Beneath the final stack of letters rested a single folded page torn from a notebook. Noah unfolded it carefully. Most of the page listed names beside dates and short notes, but one line had been written much darker than the others. "If the ledger is gone, follow where the first morning light touches the roof." Noah read it twice. Ledger. Caleb looked inside the drawer again. There was an empty rectangle in the dust at the back, the exact shape of a thick notebook. Something had rested there for years. Someone had removed it carefully. Noah thought of the missing ladder, the scrape marks on the rafters, Grace's warning that no one had ever been allowed upstairs. Now there was a missing ledger, too. He folded the page and slipped it carefully into his pocket. As the afternoon sun climbed lower, a narrow beam of light entered through the eastern window and stretched across the barn. Noah followed it with his eyes until it reached the highest roof beam above the workbench. There, barely visible beneath years of dust, was a small carved symbol burned into the wood. It looked almost like the letter H. Noah stood on the workbench until his shoulders nearly touched the rafters, studying the small burned H carved into the beam. It was too deliberate to be an accident. The mark sat exactly where the morning sunlight had reached, just as the note had promised. He stretched his hand toward it, but found nothing except rough wood and decades of dust.
Whatever Uncle Henry had wanted him to notice was not on the beam itself. It was somewhere beyond it.
Caleb climbed onto the bench beside him and examined the roof structure. "These rafters don't match," he said after a moment. Noah frowned. "What do you mean?" Caleb tapped two thick beams near the center of the roof. "Most of this barn is original timber, but these three were replaced much later." Noah looked closer. The newer beams were darker, straighter, and carried fewer cracks than the surrounding wood. Whoever had installed them had done careful work. Would someone replace only three? Caleb shook his head. Not unless they were protecting something. The words lingered in the quiet barn. Noah climbed down and walked slowly beneath the roof, comparing the old beams with the newer ones. They formed a rough triangle directly beneath the highest point of the barn, too precise to be random, too expensive to have been done without a reason. They spent the next hour repairing loose shingles from outside, from the roof. Noah noticed something he could never have seen from below. The newer boards followed a slightly different angle than the rest of the roofline, creating a narrow, raised section hidden beneath weathered tin sheets. From the ground, it disappeared completely. Caleb ran a hand across the repaired section. Henry rebuilt this more than once. How can you tell? Different nails. He pointed to several rows. These are 30 years old. Those are maybe 15. And these? He tapped a newer strip of metal. Less than 5. Noah remembered Grace saying Uncle Henry climbed onto the roof every autumn, even after age had made simple chores difficult. He had not been repairing a collapsing barn. He had been protecting one specific place. As they climbed down, the sound of an engine echoed across the property. A black pickup rolled into the yard, stopping a few yards from the entrance. A man stepped out wearing polished boots and a pressed flannel shirt that looked too clean for farm work. "You know a Bennett?" he asked. "Yes." "Victor Hale." He smiled politely while looking past Noah into the barn. "Sorry to bother you. Heard Henry's place sold." Noah nodded without returning the smile. "Can I help you?" Victor glanced toward the roof before speaking again. "I'm buying land around this part of the county. Old buildings, too. I'd be interested in taking this one off your hands." Caleb quietly crossed his arms but stayed silent. Noah leaned against the sliding door. "I bought it yesterday." "Then you've already made a profit." Victor pulled an envelope from his jacket. $5,000. Noah almost laughed. $5,000 was more money than he had seen in months. It would erase several debts immediately. It would buy food, clothes, maybe even another chance somewhere else. Yet something about Victor's timing unsettled him. "You haven't even looked inside." Victor smiled again. "I've seen enough over the years." "So you knew my uncle?" "We spoke now and then." His answer came smoothly, almost too smoothly. He was never interested in selling. Noah looked back at the barn. "Neither am I." For the first time, Victor's pleasant expression hardened, only slightly, enough to notice. "Think carefully. Old buildings become expensive." "I'll take my chances." Victor slipped the envelope back into his pocket. "If you change your mind, you know where to find me." He climbed into his truck and drove away without another word. Caleb watched until the dust settled. "That wasn't about the lumber." "No." Noah looked up toward the repaired section of roof. "It wasn't." Late that afternoon, Grace arrived carrying fresh bread. Noah told her about Victor's visit. Her smile disappeared immediately. "I wondered how long it would take." "You know him?" "Too well." She set the bread on the workbench without taking her eyes off the roof. Victor tried buying this bond from Henry for years. Why? Grace slowly shook her hand. Henry never believed Victor wanted the wood or the land. Then what? She hesitated before answering. He thought Victor was looking for something hidden. Silence settled over the barn. Noah reached into his pocket and removed the folded note about the morning sunlight. Grace read it quietly, then looked toward the highest beam where the burned H remained visible. Henry always said the roof wasn't protecting the barn. Her voice dropped almost to a whisper. It was protecting what was above it. As evening approached, Noah climbed onto the repaired workbench once more. This time he reached farther along the newer beam until his fingers brushed cold metal tucked behind the timber. He carefully pulled it free. It was an old iron hook, heavy with rust, its curved end worn smooth from years of use. Near the base, someone had stamped a single letter deep into the metal. H. The iron hook rested heavily in Noah's palm as he climbed down from the workbench. Its curved end had been polished smooth by years of use, and the stamped letter H matched the burned symbol on the roof beam almost perfectly. Uncle Henry had left too many deliberate signs for them to be accidents. Caleb turned the hook over several times before handing it back. "This wasn't made for hanging tools," he said. "It's part of something bigger." Noah slipped it into his jacket pocket. "The question is what?" Grace stood quietly near the barn door, her eyes fixed on the roof. "Henry always carried that hook whenever he worked up there." Noah looked at her. "You remember it?" She nodded. He'd never explain why. Before Noah could ask another question, Grace glanced toward the church steeple visible beyond the trees. "If you want to understand your uncle, talk to Pastor Eli. He knew Henry longer than anyone still living." The church sat on the edge of town, surrounded by tall oaks whose branches shaded the old stone building. Pastor Eli Morgan was sweeping the front steps when Noah and Grace arrived. Though well into his 70s, he still moved with quiet purpose. He smiled warmly when Grace introduced Noah. "Henry spoke about you more often than you might believe," he said. Noah lowered his eyes. "I wish I'd visited him more." Eli rested the broom against the railing. "Most regrets arrive after they're too late to fix. That doesn't mean we stop living." Inside the small church, sunlight streamed through colored glass, painting the wooden pews with soft patches of red and blue. Noah explained how he had bought the barn and described the repaired toys, the letters, the missing ledger, and the strange clues Henry had left behind. The pastor listened without interrupting. When Noah finished, Eli folded his hands. "Your uncle measured wealth differently than most people. Everyone keeps saying he helped people because he did." The pastor smiled faintly. "If someone's roof leaked, Henry repaired it. If a child's bicycle broke, he fixed it. If a widow couldn't afford a table after a storm ruined hers, Henry built another." "Did he charge them?" Eli shook his head. "Usually not." Noah remembered the unopened thank you letters filling the drawer beneath the workbench. Why didn't anyone know? Because Henry believed kindness became smaller the moment it was announced. They sat quietly for a moment before Eli stood and disappeared into a nearby office. He returned carrying a thin folder tied with faded string. "These belong to church repair records," he explained. "Henry volunteered often." Noah carefully opened the folder. Most pages listed donated lumber, repaired pews, and maintenance notes written over many years. But near the back, several pages had been torn away. Jagged edges remained where they had once been bound. "They're missing." Eli nodded sadly. "I noticed years ago." "Do you know who removed them?" "No." He hesitated. Henry wasn't surprised when he found out. Noah looked up. He expected someone to search his records. "He told me one afternoon, 'If people come asking about my barn, don't let them tear the roof apart.'" Noah felt a chill despite the warm afternoon. He actually said that? Word for word. Eli reached into the folder and removed a single envelope tucked behind the remaining papers. Across the front, in Henry's familiar handwriting, was written, "If Noah ever comes home." Noah's hands trembled as he opened it. Inside rested a folded page with only 3 sentences. "Noah, if others still seek what I protected, remember this. Don't let them destroy the roof. Everything important still depends on it." Beneath the message, Henry had drawn the same small H symbol Noah had found burned into the roof beam and stamped onto the iron hook. Noah folded the letter carefully and slipped it beside the others in his pocket. As they prepared to leave, Pastor Eli placed a hand on his shoulder. "Your uncle never believed buildings mattered." Noah looked back toward the road leading home. "Then why protect the barn for so many years?" The old pastor smiled gently. "Because sometimes a roof isn't protecting a building." He paused before adding, "Sometimes it's protecting what kindness leaves behind." On the drive back, Noah said almost nothing. Every clue now pointed upward. The repaired roof, the missing ladder, the burned H, the iron hook, the warning not to let anyone tear the roof apart. As sunset colored the sky, he unlocked the barn and stood silently beneath the rafters once again. A cool breeze slipped through a narrow gap near the highest beams, carrying with it the faint scent of aged cedar from somewhere above. The faint scent of cedar drifting through the rafters stayed with Noah long after sunset. Fresh cedar. It shouldn't have been possible. Every exposed beam in the barn was decades old, yet the breeze carried the clean smell of recently cut wood from somewhere above. He stood beneath the roof with the lantern raised, following the draft until it disappeared into the highest corner where the newer support beams met. Caleb returned the following morning, carrying a longer extension ladder borrowed from a neighboring farm. "If we're going to keep chasing Henry's clues," he said with a grin, "we might as well stop guessing." Together they leaned the ladder against one of the reinforced beams. Noah climbed carefully, testing each rung before shifting his weight. Dust coated everything above the rafters, but the new beams remained surprisingly clean. Near the peak of the roof, he noticed something hidden behind overlapping boards. "There's a gap." Caleb climbed halfway up to look. "Can you reach it?" Noah stretched as far as he safely could. His fingers slipped into a narrow opening barely large enough for his hand. Something soft brushed against his fingertips. He pulled gently. A canvas bundle slid free, wrapped in waxed cloth and tied with faded rope. Noah climbed down slowly before opening it on the workbench. Inside were several carefully repaired wooden toys, each protected by newspaper. A carved rocking horse, a small toy train, a doll's cradle. Every piece looked brand new despite its age. Tucked beneath them lay folded index cards written in Uncle Henry's familiar handwriting. Emily Parker, Christmas. Tommy Lewis, birthday. Return after repairs. Noah looked at Caleb. "These belong to people." Caleb nodded. "Looks like Henry finished fixing them." "Then why hide them?" Before either man could answer, an old pickup stopped outside. Grace stepped into the barn carrying a basket of fresh apples. She froze when she saw the toys spread across the workbench. "You found them." Noah looked up. "You knew these were here?" "Not exactly here." She smiled sadly as she picked up the little train. "I knew Henry kept things safe until families were ready to receive them."
Noah frowned. "Some of these have been here for years." Grace gently brushed dust from the rocking horse.
"Some families moved away before he could return them. Others couldn't bear accepting charity." She turned over one of the cards. "Henry never embarrassed anyone. If someone couldn't pay, he simply finished the work and waited." Noah slowly looked around the barn again. The repaired bicycles, the violin case, the unopened thank you letters. Nothing here had been collected for profit. Uncle Henry had spent years quietly restoring pieces of other people's lives. As the afternoon passed, Noah and Caleb searched the upper beams more carefully. They found another small compartment tucked between two rafters. Inside rested 3 wooden boxes no larger than shoe boxes. Each contained more repaired belongings wrapped carefully in cloth. An old music box, a hand-carved cane, a child's school desk with fresh varnish. Every item carried another handwritten tag with a family name. Caleb whistled softly. He must have spent thousands of hours doing this. Noah traced the edge of the little desk with one finger. And nobody knew. Grace smiled. That's exactly how Henry wanted it. Near the bottom of the final box, Noah discovered another folded note sealed beneath a strip of cloth tape. He opened it carefully. The handwriting was smaller than usual, as though Henry had been trying to fit everything onto a single page. If you have found these gifts, then you are learning the first lesson. Things repaired with patience are worth more than things replaced with money. Noah folded the note and slipped it into his pocket beside Henry's earlier messages. There's more, Caleb said quietly. At the bottom of the box lay one final card unlike the others. Instead of a family name, it carried only a single sentence. The upper room opens only for the one willing to wait. Noah read it twice. Upper room. Grace looked toward the roof without speaking. Caleb slowly scanned the reinforced beams again. We've been finding hiding places. He rested one hand on the ladder. But I don't think we've found the room yet. Noah followed his gaze upward, high above the rafters, beyond the strengthened roof Henry had repaired year after year. The same faint current of cool, cedar-scented air drifted quietly through the barn, as though an unseen space still waited beyond the beams, keeping it secret for just a little longer. Grace returned early the next morning, carrying an old tin box tucked beneath her arm. She set it carefully on Uncle Henry's workbench, but did not open it right away. Instead, she walked slowly around the barn, running her fingertips across shelves, benches, and hanging tools as though greeting old friends. Henry used to say this place remembered every pair of hands that ever worked here, she murmured. Noah looked up from the stack of repaired toys. You knew him better than anyone. Grace smiled faintly. Not better, just longer. She finally opened the tin box. Inside were faded receipts, a few church bulletins, and several black and white photographs. One picture showed Henry repairing a child's wagon outside the barn. Another captured him replacing a farmhouse window beside an elderly couple. None of the photographs had been framed. He hated attention, Grace said. Whenever someone tried thanking him in public, he'd disappear before the speeches started. Noah picked up another photograph. Henry stood beside the barn door with Caleb's father, both covered in sawdust and laughing at something outside the frame. Did he ever tell you what was upstairs? Grace's smile disappeared. She slowly shook her head. No, Only that if anyone ever came asking too many questions about the barn, I was never to help them reach the top. Why? Because he promised someone. Who? Grace met Noah's eyes. He never said. The answer carried no mystery beyond what they already knew. It only confirmed that Henry had chosen silence on purpose. Later that afternoon, Caleb arrived with fresh lumber for the loose sidewall. While measuring one of the support posts, he paused. "Come look at this." Deep scratches marked the weathered wood beside the newer beams. They were narrow, evenly spaced, and ran nearly 8 feet upward before disappearing into the shadows. Caleb rested his tape measure against them. These weren't made by weather. Noah touched one of the grooves. "A ladder." Caleb nodded. "Many times. Same place, same angle." They searched the floor directly beneath the marks, but found nothing except old sawdust. Whatever ladder had once stood there had vanished long ago. Noah looked upward toward the roof, where the faint scent of cedar still drifted through hidden cracks. Someone climbed up there over and over. "Or tried to," Caleb replied. Before Noah could answer, the sound of tires crunching gravel echoed outside. Victor Hale stepped out of his truck, carrying no envelope this time. He removed his hat politely before approaching the open barn door. "Thought I'd check whether you'd reconsidered." Noah crossed his arms. "I haven't." Victor glanced around the barn, his eyes lingering on the repaired toys before moving to the rafters. "Old buildings have a way of becoming dangerous." Caleb stepped beside Noah. "We'll manage." Victor ignored him. "Henry always believed there was something worth protecting in here." His voice remained calm. "He wasted years chasing that belief." Noah watched him carefully. "You came here before, didn't you?" Victor hesitated only briefly. "More than once. Looking for the attic." Victor's expression barely changed, but the silence answered well enough. "I looked for whatever Henry thought was valuable." "Did you ever find it?" "No." He gave a tired smile. "Believe me, if I had, I wouldn't still be asking to buy the barn." Noah studied him for another moment. Victor wasn't lying about that. The disappointment in his eyes felt too genuine. "Then why keep coming back?" Victor looked toward the reinforced roof. "Because Henry was the kind of man who never protected empty space." With that, he placed his hat back on his head and walked toward his truck. Before climbing inside, he looked over one shoulder. "If you find what he hid, you'll understand why he never sold this place." The pickup disappeared down the road, leaving only drifting dust behind. Caleb broke the silence first. "Well, that was strange." "No," Grace said quietly. "That was honest." Evening settled over the barn as Noah climbed the ladder once more. This time he examined every reinforced beam inch by inch. Near the highest joint, where 2 newer timbers crossed, his lantern caught another burned symbol. The same H. But beside it, almost invisible beneath layers of stain, was a tiny circular notch carved into the wood. Noah pressed it gently. Nothing happened. He pressed harder. A hollow sound echoed beyond the beam. Caleb climbed up beside him and tapped the surrounding timber with the handle of his hammer. Solid. Solid. Then suddenly hollow again. Noah's pulse quickened. Behind the beam was empty space, much larger than the narrow hiding places they had already discovered. He looked toward the roof peak, imagining a room hidden beyond the thick timbers. But when they searched every surface around the hollow section, they found no latch, no hinge, no opening. Only the same weathered beams Uncle Henry had repaired year after year. The room was there. They could hear it. They simply still had no way inside. The hollow sound inside the beam stayed in Noah's mind long after they climbed down the ladder. He stood in the center of the barn, staring toward the reinforced section of the roof. There was empty space above them. He was certain of it now. The question was no longer whether Uncle Henry had hidden something overhead. The question was how he had reached it without leaving behind a visible entrance. Caleb spread the survey sketches they had drawn across the workbench. Over the past few days, they had measured every wall, every beam, and every repaired section of the roof. Looking at them together, another pattern slowly emerged. "Look at these," Caleb said, tracing the locations of every burned H they had discovered. Noah leaned closer. One mark above the workbench, another near the reinforced rafters, a third burned into an old support post near the east wall. "They're connected," Noah whispered. Caleb nodded. Not randomly. Using a pencil, he drew lines between the three symbols. They formed a rough triangle, its center pointing directly toward the highest section of the barn roof. Grace, who had quietly watched from a nearby chair, smiled sadly. Henry always liked leaving directions without using words. Noah walked beneath the center point Caleb had marked. Sunlight slipped through a tiny crack near the roof, illuminating floating dust. He remembered the note he had found days earlier. "Follow where the first morning light touches the roof." Suddenly, every clue felt connected instead of separate. The sunlight, the H marks, the reinforced beams, the hollow space. They were all pointing toward one place. Before Noah could climb the ladder again, another truck pulled into the yard. Victor Hale stepped out slowly, this time without the confidence he had carried before. He stopped several feet from the barn entrance. "I won't stay long," he said. Noah remained where he was. "What do you want?" Victor looked around the familiar building before answering. "The truth." Caleb folded his arms. "You could start by telling yours." Victor sighed. "Years ago, I heard rumors that Henry kept something valuable above the barn." "Money?" Noah asked. Victor shook his head. "Nobody knew. Some said old deeds. Others believed family valuables. One man claimed there was gold hidden after the war." He gave a small, embarrassed smile. "I believed one of those stories." "So you searched?" "More than once." Victor looked up toward the rafters. "Henry caught me the first time." Noah waited. "Did he call the sheriff?" "No." Victor laughed softly. "He made me coffee." Grace smiled knowingly. "That sounds like Henry." Victor nodded. "He told me I was looking in the wrong place because I expected hidden things to make me rich." He looked at Noah. I thought he was speaking in riddles. Noah remembered the repaired toys, the letters, the thank you cards, and Pastor Eli's words about kindness. Maybe Henry had never been talking about treasure at all. Victor reached into his jacket and placed a folded envelope on the workbench. "That's my final offer." Noah didn't touch it. Victor smiled faintly. "Not money." Noah opened the envelope. Inside was the original purchase agreement Henry had refused to sign nearly 20 years earlier. Across the bottom, in Uncle Henry's handwriting, someone had written a single sentence. "Some things lose their value the moment they're sold." Noah looked back up. Victor shrugged. "I kept it all these years because I never understood what he meant." He tipped his hat respectfully. "I think you will." Without waiting for another answer, Victor returned to his truck and drove away for the last time. Silence settled over the barn again.
Caleb unfolded the agreement beside the survey sketches.
Something caught his attention immediately. Henry's handwritten sentence ended with a small H, exactly like the burned symbols. Beneath it, almost invisible, was a tiny arrow pointing upward. Noah looked instinctively toward the roof peak. The 3 burned H marks, the arrow, the morning sunlight. They were not simply identifying the attic. They were marking the mechanism that opened it. He climbed the ladder once more and positioned himself beside the reinforced beams, following the direction of the tiny arrow. He reached beneath the highest timber until his fingers touched cold iron hidden inside the wood. It wasn't another hook. It was the end of an old sliding latch concealed perfectly within the beam itself. Noah wrapped both hands around the iron handle and pulled. At first, nothing happened. Then a deep wooden thud echoed through the barn. Dust drifted from the ceiling as something heavy shifted above them. Slowly, almost silently, a narrow section of the roof framing separated by less than an inch, revealing the outline of a concealed hatch that had blended perfectly into the surrounding beams for decades. The hidden latch groaned as decades of dust drifted through the narrow opening above the rafters. Noah kept both hands wrapped around the iron handle while Caleb steadied the ladder below. The concealed hatch rose only a few inches before stopping against its own weight. Whatever lay above had remained undisturbed for many years. "Easy," Caleb said. "Don't force it." Together they pushed again. The hatch lifted just enough for a rush of cool, cedar-scented air to spill into the barn. Noah looked through the gap. Darkness. Nothing more. He climbed one rung higher and raised the lantern through the opening. The light revealed only rough beams and what appeared to be another wooden floor several feet above. "There's definitely a space up there," he whispered. Grace stood below with one hand over her mouth. "Henry?" Noah carefully widened the opening until there was enough room to climb through. The hidden passage led into a cramped cavity between the visible roof and another timber structure built above it. Dust blanketed every surface, untouched except for a narrow path leading farther inside. Noah crawled forward slowly with the lantern. The air smelled of cedar, old pine, and machine oil. At the end of the passage sat a single wooden chest. It was no larger than an old toolbox, built from polished oak and secured with a simple brass clasp. Noah's heartbeat quickened. Caleb crawled in behind him. "That has to be it." Noah nodded silently. Everything had pointed here. The repaired roof, the hidden latch, the burned H symbols. Uncle Henry had spent years protecting this place. He lifted the chest carefully and carried it back down into the barn. Grace and Caleb gathered around the workbench as Noah brushed away the dust. The brass clasp opened without a key. Inside lay a folded piece of linen wrapped around a single envelope. No ledger, no photographs, no hidden fortune. Noah unfolded the cloth completely. Nothing else remained inside the box. For several long seconds, no one spoke. Caleb finally broke the silence. "That's all?" Noah stared into the empty chest. Weeks of searching, every clue, every repaired beam, every warning, all leading to an empty box. His shoulders slowly sagged. "Maybe we were wrong." Grace gently picked up the envelope. The paper had yellowed with age, but Uncle Henry's handwriting remained clear across the front. "For whoever finally learns to look higher." Noah opened it carefully. Inside rested a single handwritten page. It contained only a few lines. If you have reached this place expecting treasure, you will leave disappointed. Good, because disappointment teaches patience better than success ever could. Noah read the words again, trying to understand. At the bottom of the page, Henry had written one final sentence. When you believe you have reached the top, remember to look above your own head. Caleb frowned. Above our heads? They all looked instinctively toward the open hatch in the ceiling. The hidden space they had entered appeared to end at the roof itself. Rough boards, heavy beams, nothing more. Noah climbed the ladder again, carrying the lantern back into the narrow chamber. This time he ignored the chest completely. Instead, he held the light directly against the ceiling above it. The boards looked ordinary until the lantern's glow caught a faint seam running across the planks. He reached upward. The wood felt thinner there, almost separate from the surrounding structure. "Caleb," he called softly. "Come here." Caleb climbed beside him and examined the ceiling. "That's not part of the roof." Noah traced the outline with his fingertips. It formed a large rectangle stretching almost the full width of the chamber. The grain matched perfectly, disguising the edges from anyone below. Grace watched from beneath the ladder as Noah pressed gently against one corner. It shifted almost imperceptibly. He pressed again. Another tiny movement. His pulse quickened. They had spent days searching inside the hidden compartment, believing it was the final destination. Uncle Henry had expected exactly that. The chest, the letter, even the disappointment had been one last lesson in patience. Noah slid the lantern across the boards once more. Near the center of the wooden ceiling, barely visible beneath decades of dust, was another burned H. This one pointed not toward the hidden chamber they had just opened, but toward the broad wooden surface above it. Noah slowly smiled for the first time that day. "This isn't the attic," he whispered. "It's only the hallway." He slipped his fingers beneath the faint seam of the overhead boards and felt the entire ceiling shift ever so slightly beneath his hand. Noah tightened his grip beneath the edge of the overhead panel and pushed upward with both hands. At first, nothing happened. Then, with a deep groan of old timber, the false ceiling slowly lifted. Dust drifted through the lantern light as cool air poured into the hidden passage. Caleb climbed beside him and helped raise the panel high enough to reveal a narrow opening. Beyond it stretched a full attic, hidden above the barn all along. Noah froze. It was far larger than he had imagined. The room extended almost the entire length of the building, framed by sturdy cedar beams that Uncle Henry had carefully protected for decades. Sunlight filtered through tiny ventilation slits beneath the roofline, illuminating rows of neatly arranged shelves. Nothing looked abandoned. Every item had been covered with cloth to keep away dust. It felt less like an attic than a museum built by one quiet man who had never expected visitors. Noah climbed inside first. His boots landed softly on clean wooden planks. Caleb followed, then helped Grace through the opening. For several moments, none of them spoke. Along one wall stood dozens of restored bicycles in perfect condition. Beside them were shelves filled with repaired toys, rocking horses, dolls, toy trains, handmade puzzles, and baseball gloves stitched back together. Another section held carefully refinished kitchen chairs, small tables, crutches, walkers, sewing machines, violins, toolboxes, clocks, and children's desks. Every object carried a handwritten tag with a family name and a date. Noah walked slowly between the shelves, reading them one by one. Emily Parker, winter coat chest repaired. James Holloway, toolbox restored after the fire. Maria Collins, rocking chair rebuilt. Tommy Lewis, bicycle completed. Some names matched the letters downstairs. Others appeared in Pastor Eli's church records. Uncle Henry had quietly spent decades repairing pieces of other people's lives, keeping each item safe until the owners could accept it or return for it. At the far end of the attic stood a sturdy cedar desk beneath a small window. Resting on it was a thick leather ledger. Noah carefully lifted it. Inside were hundreds of handwritten entries spanning more than 30 years. Every page listed names, repairs completed, materials used, and one final column labeled paid. Almost every line contained the same word: nothing. No charge. Noah slowly turned the pages. Sometimes Henry had written short notes beside the names. Lost his job. 3 children. Don't mention payment. Husband recovering. Return before Christmas. Widow too proud to ask for help. Fix quietly. Noah felt his throat tighten. Uncle Henry had never kept these records to be recognized. He had kept them so no kindness would ever be forgotten, even if no one else knew it had happened. Tucked inside the back cover rested one final envelope addressed simply to Noah. He opened it with trembling hands. My dear nephew, if you are reading this, then you looked long enough to understand what this place was built to protect. It was never money. It was never family valuables. It was never the barn itself. People often believe the most valuable things can be locked away inside a safe. They are wrong. The greatest things we leave behind are the lives we quietly make easier for someone else. I knew one day people would search this barn expecting treasure. Let them. Those who only want wealth will always stop too early. But someone willing to keep climbing, willing to keep looking after disappointment, will eventually find this room. Noah smiled through tears as he reached the final page of the ledger. Henry's handwriting had become weaker, but every word remained steady. If this barn now belongs to you, don't spend your life protecting old wood. Protect what this place was always meant for. Open the doors. Fix what others cannot afford to fix. Let people leave with hope instead of debt. That will be worth more than anything I could ever leave you. Noah closed the ledger and looked around the hidden attic once more. Suddenly, every clue made perfect sense. The reinforced roof, the missing ladder, the burned H marks, the warnings never to destroy the roof. Henry had not been protecting possessions. He had been protecting an idea until someone was ready to understand it. Grace quietly wiped away tears. He finally has someone who understands. Caleb looked around the attic and smiled. I think the old man knew exactly who would find this place. Over the following months, the barn slowly came back to life. Noah repaired the walls, strengthened the foundation, and reopened Uncle Henry's workshop. Every Saturday, families from town began stopping by with broken furniture, bicycles, walkers, toys, and tools. Some could pay. Many could not. Noah fixed them anyway. Caleb volunteered almost every weekend. Grace welcomed visitors with coffee and homemade pie. Pastor Eli often sat on the porch sharing stories about Henry with children who had never met him. The hidden attic remained exactly where Henry had left it, no longer a secret, but a reminder. Whenever Noah finished repairing something, he climbed upstairs, opened the old ledger, and added one more handwritten line beneath Uncle Henry's final entry. Years later, people no longer called it Henry's barn. They simply called it the barn, a place where no one was turned away because they lacked money. On quiet evenings after the last family had gone home, Noah would stand beneath the repaired roof and look toward the hidden attic above. He had arrived with only $83, spent $50 on what everyone believed was a worthless old building, and thought he had lost almost everything. Instead, he discovered that the greatest inheritance was never something you could sell. It was a way of living generous enough that decades later, strangers would still be warmed by the kindness you left behind. Sometimes, the most valuable things are hidden in places no one thinks to look. Not because they're meant to stay secret forever, but because they can only be understood by someone willing to keep searching after disappointment. Noah believed he had spent $50 of his last $83 on a collapsing old barn. What he actually bought was the chance to see the world through his uncle's eyes. Henry Bennett never became a wealthy man. He never built a famous business. Most people outside that small town never even knew his name. Yet, through thousands of quiet acts of kindness, he repaired far more than broken toys, furniture, or bicycles. He repaired hope. He restored dignity. He reminded people that asking for help should never be a reason to feel ashamed. In the end, the hidden attic wasn't protecting a fortune. It was protecting a lifetime of compassion, a legacy measured not by what one person owned, but by how many lives they quietly made better. Years later, parents would bring their children to the old barn and tell them about the man who never asked for payment when someone truly needed help. And every repaired bicycle that rolled away, every chair that returned to a family dinner table, every toy that found its way back into a child's hands became another chapter in the legacy Uncle Henry began so many years before. Because true wealth is never counted in dollars. It's counted in the lives that are a little brighter because you were here. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who still believes that kindness can change the world. Thank you for spending your time with us. We'll see you in the next story.